All right, welcome back to another episode of Miss Bioscience. We're going to be doing a lab today, and this lab is going to build off of some of the content that we covered last week. So last week we talked about mutations and how they can help us accumulate new traits and adaptations that can make us advantageous. And so one we looked at in particular for humans was lactose tolerance. So some populations developed a tolerance for the sugar lactose into adulthood. And this is a common tolerance that we see in infants because it's their main source of food, right? Like mammals breastfeed. But what we don't usually see in mammal species is an ability to continue to drink or take advantage of that milk into adulthood. Humans have acquired that adaptation, likely because of some environmental pressures. Today's lab is going to look at what is actually happening at a molecular level inside of the body when lactase production continues. So what does lactase actually do for us? How does it make food digestible, especially dairy products? So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm excited to get started. So for materials, you'll need a selection of dairy products, and this is where you can kind of experiment and have some fun. I used regular milk, regular cream, oat milk, and coconut milk, but you can really choose just about any dairy or non-dairy product for this lab. You will also need some lactase, and what I have done here is I've taken about 4 of these lactase pills and ground them up into some water. You will want to make a solution out of it to add to our samples. And then you will need glucose test strips. These can be purchased on Amazon. I'll include a link in the comments. And then these dropper bottles, you can get just about anywhere. You can get on Amazon. You can also get them in the craft store in like the soap section. And then I also have a dropper bottle with water here as my control sample. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I have some sample cups here that I'm going to use to keep track of each of my samples. And I'm going to make sure that for each kind of milk that I'm testing, I have a sample with lactase, and then I have a control sample. And the control sample we will only add water to, so it's not going to receive any of that enzyme. All right, next thing is to start adding my samples to each of these cups. You don't need very much, just maybe cover the bottom of the cup.
Okay, so now that I have a little bit of sample in each of these cups, I have my not lactase sample and my lactase sample. My next step is to add about 1 milliliter of water to all of my control samples, and then about 1 milliliter of the lactase solution to all of my lactase samples. And then we want to give everything like a little bit of a swirl to kind of make sure that it's mixed up nicely.
Okay, so our next step is going to be to use these glucose test strips, and you'll notice that the protocol for these test strips is to dip it into the solution only for 1 to 2 seconds, but then we're going to let it sit for 3 minutes, and then we'll be able to compare it to this color chart. Right, just for fun, you can start to see a little bit of a color change in these 2 samples, which are my 2 regular dairy. It looks like we went from about 0 milligrams of glucose to maybe about 100. Just for fun, I'm gonna add another milliliter of lactose or lactase to each sample and see if the glucose increases. We can see that not much change between the two samples, and that's what we would expect because there should not be any lactose sugar in these samples to begin with, and so there shouldn't be anything to change when we add the lactase. However, when we added the lactase to our dairy samples, to our regular cream and our regular milk, we can see that we go from very, very little glucose, so this is 0 milligrams of glucose per liter. We can see that that increased a lot, and not much change between my 1 milliliter of lactase and 2 milliliters of lactase, but we did see a lot of glucose produced, and that is because that lactase sugar is breaking down the lactose into glucose, and this is the sugar that your body can digest more easily, especially if you're lactose intolerant. So hopefully that helps you picture what's going on in your body. If you are lactose tolerant, then that just means that you are creating this lactase enzyme inside of your digestive system, and that enzyme is taking care of the lactose for you, breaking it down into glucose that you can digest. If you're lactose intolerant, you might have to take a supplement, or you might have to avoid lactose altogether because you don't have the tools that you need to digest that lactose into glucose that your body can process. So as I've mentioned a few times, there are a lot of different ways that you could run this experiment. You could try different brands of the lactase supplement. You could try different brands of dairy products. You could try different kinds of dairy, like different cheeses, yogurts, cottage cheese, etc. You can try different lengths of time, different amounts of lactase. There's lots of potential hypotheses that you and your students can test out with this experiment, and it's very inexpensive and low hazard, since all we're using are these little test strips. So give it a try. I would love to see what experiments you and your students come up with, and so keep me in the loop. And if you have any questions or comments, you know where to leave them. And we'll see you next week for another Miss Bioscience episode.